Good afternoon, everyone. Happy E-84. My name is Astrid Ochoa. I am the Executive Director of Future of California Elections. FOS is a nonpartisan network of election officials, civil rights organizations, reform advocates, and civic engagement partners. Our network has been working together for nearly a decade to modernize elections and expand participation. Our focus for 2020 is implementing policies that improve the voter experience and make voting easier through the ongoing pandemic. I want to begin by acknowledging the times that we are in. We are at the eve of celebrating 100 years of the women's suffrage movement. We have just celebrated 55 years of the Voting Rights Act, which protects the rights for communities of color and limited English proficient voters. And we're at 30 years of the Americans Accessibility Rights Act, which protects the rights of voters with disabilities. I start with this to set the tone for our conversation today. Our webinar, Effective Messaging to Voters in the 2020 Presidential Election, isn't just about messaging. It's about ensuring that voters can exercise their protected rights to vote. Voters are facing monumental and unprecedented challenges in their daily lives due to the ongoing pandemic. This is where the FOS model of cross-sector collaboration comes in. The work of voter education is bigger than any single organization. Together, we can work to provide voters with clear and consistent messaging to ensure they are informed and can cast a successful ballot this fall. I'm excited for today's presentations. The research was inspired by two simple questions. Can we assume to know how voters are thinking about voting in a pandemic, and what messages will resonate with them? I want to thank Dr. Mindy Romero at the Price School of Public Policy at USC and our advisory committee for joining us on this journey to answer these questions. The results from the survey are robust, and we've divided the event today into two parts. The first will focus on the research findings around messaging, and the second will focus on the opinions of voters and their likelihood for voting in a pandemic. With that, I want to properly introduce our partner in this work, Dr. Mindy Romero. Mindy Romero is a founder and director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at the University of Southern California Sol Price School of Public Policy, Sacramento. Dr. Romero is a political sociologist and holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California, Davis. Her research focuses on political behavior and race and ethnicity, seeking to explain patterns of voting and political underrepresentation, particularly among youth and communities of color in California and the US. And with that, thank you, Mindy, for joining us and for sharing your work today.
Thank you very much, Astrid, for the partnership. Working with you, who really helped inspire this research to happen to begin with, and then of course working with the members of the Future of California Elections, and as I'll mention in a moment, the survey's advisory committee. Should I just go ahead and jump in on the study?
Yes, please do. Okay,
I'm going to make sure. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're excited to bring this brand new research to you. We'll be, by the end of the month, releasing a full report on the work. But today we're going to give you some highlights, and really we're bringing it too early. Normally we would give you a webinar alongside a completed, newly published report. But we realize that in the times that we're in, it's just absolutely critical that everyone has as much information as possible to do the important work that they're doing. Outreach by advocates and community groups to voters, of course, from election officials as well. And so we wanted to get these results to you immediately, as quickly as we could. You'll see still today, it's going to be a brief presentation. We're just going to go over highlights. So there will be more to come, know that. And happy to answer any questions in the interim between now and publication if folks are seeking some additional information, want clarity, want to know if we've broken the data out in other ways that we haven't talked about here today. I'm certainly happy to answer that in the Q&A as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so jumping in, I mentioned the advisory committee. So again, first and foremost, thanking Astrid for her partnership in the research design, and certainly the funding that was provided by the Future of California Elections, as well as through the Democracy Fund. And all of these individuals here, many of you I think are on the call, and thank you very much for joining us if you are, really played a pivotal role in helping us design the survey itself. Prior to actually creating the instrument, the list of questions that go out to respondents, and also reviewing the survey before it was put in the field. So really important impact or on that work, and we wanted to make sure that, of course, the questions that we asked and the topics that we covered were kind of grounded in the questions that many of you are asking yourselves in terms of how to handle and approach your outreach, particularly now during this time of COVID. All right, and then I also would like to make just a quick shout out to Eric McGee. Many of you know him, a research fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. He also was a wonderful advisor on the study and on the design and the analysis. So I'm going to thank him as well. All right, so it was a very large online survey of nearly 12,000 of eligible voters, and we define those as adult citizens eligible to vote. This large sample by design allowed us to get a very large sample of, by race, ethnicity, age, income, and other statuses. We fielded it very recently, as you can see, 22nd to 29. These data are hot off the presses, so to speak. And we are, this first half, going to be talking about, I'm presenting you our findings on specifically the voter messaging. So the testing of different messages and their impact on the likelihood of turnout in November. And then the second half of my presentation today, we'll kind of go away and of course do the panel and then come back. In the second half, we're moving away from the testing of messages and talking about the rest of the survey, some highlights, I should say, from the rest of the survey, which is really focused on voters' opinions on voting this November, their concerns, if they have those in terms of voting, the voting method, the types of information, trusted information sources, the timing, and kind of the how and when they're anticipating voting, all of that in that vein. Okay, and to go through the messages, obviously for time, it's going to be very quick. We are releasing today a fact sheet that is just focused on the messages themselves. Again, a full report on everything at the end of the month. We'll put that link into the chat by the end of the hour. So you'll have the definitions and the detailed text in that fact sheet on these messages. So just know I'm going to go through them quickly as I describe them to you, but you'll have a physical document, if you will, to be able to look at them later. So we randomly divided all of those responses that I mentioned a moment ago into 7 groups. One was a control group. That control group did not get a message. And then everybody else got one of 6 messages. So a voting options message, as we're calling it, that's kind of our core message. It explained voters' options in the general election. And again, I'll show that to you in a moment. And then from there, we kind of kept that as our core message and we deviated. So the only thing that was different was the additional text. So there was an additional text for safety language, an additional text of community empowerment language, excuse me. We also took that voting options message and said it was from trusted community messengers to see if the messenger made a difference. And then we combined a voting options message, with a safety message specifically from trusted community members. And then lastly, we reduced that voting options message just to a vote by mail only message. And you'll see this in a moment. So the first thing I want to just talk about, show you is the control group numbers. So here, and many of you may know if you have familiarity with surveys that it's quite a common thing in surveys when you ask voters their likelihood of voting. The voters will often, because of many reasons, social desirability effects, for instance, kind of overstate or be very enthusiastic, if you will, in terms of their likelihood of voting. But we're not, for our purposes here, it's not about how likely they are, it's not about that percentage, but rather because this is an experimental treatment, we're looking at the differences across these 7 groups, the control group to the different types of messages. So, all else being equal, what does seeing one message versus seeing another message, right, have on their likelihood of voting? So hopefully that makes sense. So just briefly, these are the numbers in terms of extremely likely, somewhat likely, kind of neutral in between, somewhat unlikely, and extremely unlikely. Again, this is a control group. By race, ethnicity, and I won't really get into age today because of time, but there's really some interesting findings. Overall, the younger you go, particularly 18 to 24, the stated likelihood of voting or extremely likelihood of voting is much lower, and that's consistent with other surveys. But African Americans, you can see, is lower than the general group. That blue bar is at extremely likely, all the way up right to the far right. We look at white being at 81.5%. Okay, so quickly here through the messages, this was our core message. So I will kind of articulate this. Voting is easier than ever before. You choose how and when to vote. every registered voter in California will automatically get a ballot in the mail, even if they didn't request one. You have 3 options to return your ballot. You can return it by mail, drop it off at a ballot drop box or voting location near you. You can also vote in person at a voting location starting the weekend before Election Day or through Election Day. So that's our core message. Again, one group got this. Then another group got that core message with safety language, kind of health and safety language added. And what I've done here, just because I'm not going to go through all of these right now because of time, just kind of underlined the elements that we added that were kind of health and safety related. So vote safe California, voting is safer than ever before. Then you get that core message still, and then a little bit about safe physical distancing and overall social distancing and health measures will be in place, right? Assuring voters that they will be in place. Voting options was an empowerment message, still the same core message, but kind of ending with the future is ours, to build by voting together. We have to work to do. The first step is to vote. We must vote for our families, vote for our communities, vote for our future. And again, what we're doing is testing if there's an impact, right, on the likelihood of voting across, depending on, I should say, the message that the respondents received. The trusted messenger. So we've got the same core voting options message, but here now we say that this is from a civil rights organization, right? So for many, a trusted messenger. Next, we combine that message with some safety language and also still say that it's from a trusted messenger. So again, for time, we'll move through here. And then the voting by mail only message, very similar language, but we're only talking about VBM and we're not talking about, right, being able to go to a vote center and vote in person. Okay, so messaging impact. What was the impact? So of the 6 messages the survey tested, again, we have the control as well. Those with the largest effect on voting are the core options message, and I'll show you a chart here in a moment. But that core voting options message, that very first one, and the version that's accompanied by community empowerment language. So adding in, like, this is for our vote, our future, our communities, also had a positive impact. The voting options message that had the added safety language did not have as large of a positive impact on the likelihood of voting as the other messages. And of course, this has been a question, I know, for many groups. You know, do we talk about safety? How do we talk about safety? The concern that safety could potentially, and I'm not saying that here, that this is the case, but the potential that safety could maybe highlight concerns or turn voters away. So that's why, for obvious reasons, why we included these messages in the survey. But the effect of the safety message was greater when it was delivered by a trusted messenger. So there's a lot going on in this chart, so forgive me. And you might see the screen sharing controls at the bottom are kind of blocking things, but this is just showing you all 6 messages and comparing that against the control. So again, the group that didn't get any message at all, how did these messages vary? So the likelihood of voting going up or going down when someone received one of these messages. Hopefully that's clear. So the voting options message, as you can see, both the extremely likely and the somewhat likely went up over the control. So the group that got this had higher. And we, in the kind of experimental treatment world, these may seem like small numbers, but these are actually significant for us in terms of identifying a difference. The vote by mail message, there was a positive and somewhat likely, but a decline in the extremely likely. I just take you for time all the way over to the community empowerment message, that's the 4th one in. You'll see also an increase in both the extremely likely and the somewhat likely, again, over the control, getting no message at all. And then the trusted messenger was kind of split. People moved into that somewhat likely category, but we also lost people out of the extremely likely. But when they got, and now I'm just taking you over to the far right, when they got that trusted messenger, when they got that safety message from a trusted messenger, the combination, right, you can see 3.6% higher, and these are percentage points, of course, higher than the control group. So back to the conclusion here, if you're thinking about a safety message, it did matter if it was delivered by a trusted messenger. And these are some differences by race, ethnicity as well. For time, I won't get into this. It's a little bit more time-consuming and a little bit more nuanced, but this is also in the fact sheet and it's important to see this, particularly for African Americans. There were some Asian Americans, some some differences to talk about here in terms of the messages versus the control group. But this particular chart is only focused on the voting options message. It's a little overwhelming to show you all the messages, so just focusing on the voting options messages is the difference over the control group. And you can see that for African American and Asian Americans. Okay. Now I'm going to stop there for time, and we're going to turn it over to our panel. And just note that we're going to come back and talk about the second component that we're highlighting today. So moving away from the messaging and talking about and presenting the findings from the other elements of the survey. So specifically talking about eligible voters' concerns on voting, their preferences of how and when to vote, trusted information sources, and we are breaking this out. I'll be breaking it out by race, ethnicity, and talking a little bit here, I think a few slides on some noteworthy differences by age. But Astrid, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mindy, for providing those insights. And just a reminder, if you could drop your questions about the research in the panel into the Q&A. We're going to come back. Mindy's going to join us in a bit to go through the Q&A with us. Right now, we're going to have a panel discussion, and so I wanted to invite our panelists. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Future of California Elections is a network of election officials and nonprofit partners. And so our panel today represents, we have an election official, a civil rights advocate, and a civic engagement expert. So if we can go ahead and turn on their cameras, we're going to be joined by Registrar of Voters of Sacramento County, Courtney Bailey Canelos. Courtney has 15 years of experience in voter registration and elections. She was a key figure in Sacramento County's implementation of the Voters' Choice Act. We also have Fred Neeson joining our panel. Fred is the supervising attorney for Disability Rights California. He coordinates DRC's voting work and leads a team of attorneys and advocates seeking to improve voting accessibility statewide. And we're also joined on this panel discussion by Karen Diaz, the electoral field manager for the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, CHIRLA. Karen is an experienced campaign and grassroots organizer. She has successfully managed field programs across California, focused on the continued growth of the Latino, foreign-born, and new voter turnout. So Courtney, Fred, and Karen, thank you for joining us today. I know how busy everyone is, and I appreciate you taking the time for this conversation. So let's jump right in. And I wanted to get your reactions to the research. What are the biggest challenges that you see for voter education? And I'll preface this also, if you could draw on your experiences. All of you have worked on the transition of voting models from traditional polling places to Voters' Choice Act. And so what parallels do you see here? We're now faced with a pandemic, unprecedented situation. So we have new challenges to perhaps traditional ways of voter education. So we could hear from each of you your perspectives on this. And Courtney, why don't we go ahead and start with you, and then we'll hear from Fred and Karen.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Romero, for that great research. Especially, I think, when we refer to our challenges when implementing a new voting model or anything new, it's consistency with messaging and honesty and expectations. And I think, one of the challenges we had with moving to the Voters' Choice Act in 2018 was we were expected to educate on it, and we didn't even know what it was going to look like. And we kind of faced that similar situation with this pandemic. We are working with our local health officials, but as you know, information changes. Information on the virus changes, information on best practices are constantly changing. So I think one of our challenges is to come up with consistent messaging, especially as counties are planning to implement things a little bit differently, especially in regards to wearing masks. So I think it's something that to try and be consistent within our county and our local health orders is something we're going to try really hard. And again, honest in expectations as far as what voters will experience in-person voting, what voters might experience with vote by mail and possible delays with the mail, and to be as honest as possible, but knowing we're not going to cover everything.
Great, thank you for those reflections on that. Definitely lots of challenges there. Fred, what are some of the challenges that you see for voters with disabilities in the voter education space?
Some of it is because of the fact because a lot of people with disabilities don't have internet access. The television call or laptop that that's the challenge that will be facing from now to November. But as far as the messaging and Mindy before, it was good to hear, but what the way I've been presenting it is the right way to give people all the options
Mm-hmm.
and let them decide, because both mail is necessary for some, but not doable for others.
Mm-hmm.
The range of options.
Yeah.
Come back 2018, there were a couple areas, but kept performing it as all by mail.
Mm-hmm.
And telling people to vote by mail. Reluctant, it took time to explain that people need all the options to let them decide
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
without scaring them.
Yeah. Yeah, that and thank you, Fred, for those reflections. And there's a lot that you said there, especially this last part. Let them decide, give them all the options without scaring them, right? Because there is a component of fear. Where you are in a pandemic. Let's be honest about this, right? It's unprecedented. And so, Karen, what are you seeing in Churla's network and the voters you reach out to? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing for public education, and how is Churla addressing some of those?
Yeah, thank you for inviting us, Astrid and Mindy, for your research. I think I was talking about it with my coworkers, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is that we feel that messaging is not made for Latino communities. We have voters at the statewide level, and messagings just differ from county to county. While something might look one way in Sacramento under BCA, we saw that it looked very differently in LA County for our voters and for our organizers. So many of us are left with the daunting task of deciding how are we going to translate these messages and these voting options. And even though there is an investment in trying to get information out to voters, we still have to play a major role in disseminating and translating that information into messages that are relatable and understandable at the same time to our community. So the way that we often try to overcome these barriers and these challenges is by having an integrated voter engagement approach. From here on out until election, we plan to call our voters, write letters to our voters, leave flyers behind. And I think a challenge is that we are not going to be able to have those face-to-face conversations, which we so often rely on, and that's something that we have gotten so good at over the past couple of years. So we're going to have to leverage our social media platforms and ensure that our entire organization is able to lift the voting options and that they truly understand them so that we can communicate it So while we're having legal clinics with them, we're having community organizing, we're able to share that. So I think for us, the research from the Center for Inclusive Democracy on messaging in time of COVID-19 just supports the fact that community-based organizations are trusted messengers. And over the years, CHIRLA has established a demonstrated history of being able to educate voters and just being that partner that can talk to infrequent voters, anyone who's over 18, U.S. citizen, foreign-born Latinos, regardless of party affiliation. And I think that's what the message supports. The county registers need to rely on organizations like CHIRLA to be able to get out the Latino vote.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for those perspectives. And so what we're hearing right now is, there's a lot to take in right now, right? Courtney, you kicked us off by sharing that we need to be honest about the voter expectations. Fred reminded us we also have to balance to not scare people away and make assumptions, And then Karen, you raised really important points about making sure that the messaging is tailored to the community, but as Fred said, also to the individual, because not all voters can vote by mail. Even as today on Zoom, not all voters have access to internet or technology, to Fred's point. So Courtney, can you talk to us a little bit about the voting options? I know I'm going a little bit off script, but I think it's important for people to have tangible options for voting. So how are election officials offering those options for the cycle?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that, I guess if you're a little too honest, you might scare some folks away. So you have to be careful about that. But I think, something that Voters' Choice Act counties experienced with things like lines and folks still waiting until the last day to vote. I think we've seen some trends there that we can use to let voters know you will experience lines if you choose to wait until the last day to vote or on election day. So, election officials, and I know I'm lucky I not only have brilliant staff, but I have brilliant election official neighbors. And we've been working on some joint messaging efforts and some great ideas to talk about vote by mail. And on the vote by mail side, we all are on pretty much the same page on consistency of what we're encouraging. Simple, safe, secure was something from Sutter County. Make your home your polling place from YOLO. San Joaquin, stay at home, vote at home. We're all pretty consistent in that. When it came to in-person though, that was something where each county, just in our conversations, really appeared to be different on what it looks like. As far as, yes, we're providing PPE. Yes, we're providing all the safety to protect our poll workers. Our big concern is handling masks and how to deal with those situations. And we're used to during presidential elections experiencing altercations anyways. During a pandemic, it's going to be tenfold. So how do we prepare our poll workers and our voters that there could be some scary situations that could possibly go viral. And so we're trying to come up with de-escalation procedures. But, the vote by mail is definitely something we're all working on how to say. Some are saying vote by mail, some aren't. And then in person, whether or not it's polling places, vote centers, a hybrid of, and then of course, really encouraging the drop box usage. That is something else that our kind of joint county effort has been working on is consistency on having and providing drop boxes and the usage of drop boxes to have folks feel more comfortable with the fact that it goes from their hands directly to us. And, we hold the keys, we're responsible for it. So we definitely found common ground on drop boxes, vote by mail, but the in-person is something that is varying from county to county.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know that our audience is expert for the most part, but just wanted to highlight the fact that there may be different options for voting. There will be options across the state. Everybody's getting a vote by mail ballot, and there will be opportunities to vote in person. But as Courtney was highlighting, the way in-person voting is going to be carried out may vary from county to county. So in a neighboring county may be completely different from yours. So that is where this conversation about trusted messengers comes in, and we saw it in the research just now. And so I wanted to go back to Fred and then Karen, also hear from you. Who are the trusted messengers in your community? And how has using trusted messengers played out in your own work? And then Courtney, I'm going to close it up with you before we transition and have audience Q&A. So Fred, who are the trusted messengers for your community, and how do you incorporate them into your work?
The disability community, it depends on where you live. For the most part, is independent and the evidence that go for pretty much everywhere. They are all different in what they do, but most of them right now are doing this work in one way or another. And that's the biggest people in other areas. It could be what it could be. It could be service providers who help them. Whether or not that's a good thing is another story. And a lot of people that don't know or because us, but some way get the number because if it's short enough people who might not know, they'll figure out who does know. But for the most part, I don't advocates.
Great, thank you, Fred, for that. And definitely, those are important sources to consider as people are thinking about reaching out to voters with disabilities, reaching out to these types of organizations, independent living centers, and the service providers. And so Churla is a trusted messenger. You shared that in your remarks, Karen, and obviously many know the good work of Churla. But who are other trusted messengers for your community? Where do Latino voters, immigrant voters get information?
I think for us at Churla, our trusted messengers are our organizers, our volunteers, and our community members. I think what we're trying to do is just to build a network of people who are like the leaders in their community, and we can give them all the tools that are out there as possible. But at the end of the day, it comes down to like people like my mom or people like moms in community areas, like they hear the information from us in a language, and when you share information from someone that looks like you, speaks the same language that you do, you'll feel more inclined to just and encouraged to go out and vote and reach out to them because they look the same way that you do. So I think for a lot of us, they come to us because we look like them. I look like their daughter, and I feel approachable to them. So I think that's why having community like messengers are so important, and that's why it's so important for us to work with people like Courtney and to work with people like Dean Logan and LA County so that they can give us the resources so we can give them to other people that look like us to share those community members. And I think that's where the foreign-born immigrants that are now voters are receiving their messages from. That's where first-time voters who just turned 18 are going to be receiving their information from people that look like their peers and speak their language.
Great, thank you for that perspective. So Courtney, I wanted to close out this conversation before we transition to audience Q&A. We're gonna bring Mindy back in a second. So what we heard from Fred and Karen were, the trusted messengers are the individuals that are having direct contact with voters, and they are people who look like them. In a county office, you've done so well with public education. Can you share some of the strategies that you've used to make sure you're hearing and that you're touching these trusted messengers who are reaching, your target audience, which is every voter in your county?
Yeah, and I agree with Karen completely, where we've noticed, where I went to a TET festival event and, no one came by me. And, and then once we had someone that either spoke the language or, as Karen mentioned, if it looks like you or looks like your daughter or looks like your father or mother, it does make a difference. And especially when it comes to language and messaging, because as we know, literal translations don't always translate, especially when you try to get across a message or a slogan. And so, having that community input to provide the best messaging is valuable. So to have your community members review your messaging, provide input on messaging, whether or not it's even the colors or the designs, is it accessible? Is it readable? All those things you really need your community members input on. And, I would ask Mindy, I'm hoping that the county election officials are trusted messengers. But so maybe she could touch on that a little bit. I know, the Common Cause did a great study talking about how some of the voting materials, when it looked like it, came from a government official or it came from, your county election official, it received a positive response, which was shocking to me and kind of glad for that. But, you do wonder how much of the fact that we're government, what that means to folks, especially what that means to folks right now during, this day and age. And while there's been studies that the higher up you go, state, federal, there's less trust, there still seems to be a bit of trust on the local level. And we want to continue that trust. In the past, we did, come watch our process, come on in. Of course, the pandemic is making us think of how to still be transparent while providing safety of our staff, our observers. And so, I know some counties are doing live streams, some live Q&A events, some virtual tours, things like that to show that we are still trying to be transparent, but also, we want to protect our staff and we want to protect everyone that we can, because no one wants that on their conscience.
Thanks, Courtney, for sharing that. And so we're going to invite Mindy back. Courtney set us up with a very important question that's also been coming in through the Q&A. So good to see you again. And thank you to our panel for that good discussion and for sharing your thoughts. Nobody's, done elections and outreach and messaging in a pandemic. So I appreciate you all being bold with your ideas. And this is a space for sharing those ideas as we're all trying to learn together. So a question that came in through the Q&A, and Courtney prompted it as well, which is, is government a trusted messenger? What did you see in the research?
So great question. So in my next presentation, I will give some data just showing where people get their information. But in terms of the messages that we tested, we had to make some hard choices. We had a very large sample size. It allowed us to test 6 messages and have a control group. But there was a trade-off in terms of, we couldn't test every type of messenger, obviously, or every type of potential kind of question that people are kind of weighing right now. So in the end, we didn't test a governmental source. Hopefully, a future survey, but right now we didn't.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that doesn't mean to suggest in any way, shape, or form we think that would have less of an impact. But we had to, as I said, it was a bit of a trade-off for us in terms of making sure our committee and many other types of input we got. There was a lot of interest in understanding kind of the nuance around the safety question. So we made sure that we included two questions around that, or two treatments around that.
Great. The other set of questions we have are around strategies for engaging college students and youth, and also wanting to know what the research showed. I know you're going to share demographics in a bit, but maybe you can drop a little bit here. So maybe Mindy, you can share the research a little bit, and then if our panel can share their thoughts on strategies for reaching youth and college students.
Okay. Does that mean you want me to jump? Do you want to jump into the presentation then now?
Oh no.
Sorry.
Not yet, but maybe we can. Okay, so for that, so
I misunderstood.
We'll leave that as a teaser then. If you have a slide on it, I haven't seen the slides myself for the research, so I wanted to. I'm learning as we go, so we'll leave that as a teaser. We'll look at the data for youth and college students. But how about strategies? If our panel can speak to strategies for reaching youth and college students and what you're doing around that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay. I was like, oh, I actually want to hear what Karen says about it. But, I think this has always been a struggle, whether it's during a pandemic or not. And of course, a pandemic with so many people, either that plan to be away and are home or vice versa, it continues to be a struggle. And so, what I've seen as far as the Secretary of State and other counties, really just making sure that you check your information and that you can claim your residence and have your ballot sent anywhere. And so we try to get that messaging out. And I think, the state, and I've seen some great examples from other counties that, really focus on the check your registration, make sure you're set. Are you ready to vote? And I think those messages, especially right now, I've seen them, though I guess kind of I'm in the elections world, so I probably am more exposed, but, I've seen them quite a bit. And I think that's the great step to start. And then also, we have partnerships with our local university. We'll still have a vote center on campus, and they've provided some insight on what they're doing to help get the word out to their students. And again, I think, from the students' perspective, to hear from the schools on the best way on how to vote and what your voting options are has been pretty effective.
I think I'm going to add on to what Courtney was saying. So we have a college component and we have a high school component. And for us, when we talk about elections and getting the message on getting college students and youth voters, we make it part of our culture. So we don't just talk about elections every 4 years, or it's 10 weeks before election, it's time to start getting the message out. We make sure that if legislation is happening, right now we see a lot of things moving with election reform. We've been having these conversations on a daily basis with our community members, whether we have an internship that's related to immigrant rights, or we try to incorporate the voting message. And we make sure that, we train our high school students that are leaders, because they're going to be the ones making fun TikToks, and they're going to be the ones sharing the social media posts. And, sometimes they ask me that they don't understand, or they don't know where to go find the information from the registrar's office. So I'm the one that passes on the information. But I think one big thing that registrars and governmental officials can do is they can simplify the information a little bit more, and maybe perhaps show it to a youth audience and ask them how this can be something that can be more fun. I know that when I first got into the electoral work, I didn't know how to find out that 29 days before election is when by mail ballots drop. So making sure that the websites and those resources that they know clearly so well how to use, that it's really easy for them to find that information. And hopefully that's what the research shows, that they're excited for voting. It should just be a lot easier for them to find that information.
Great, thank you. And then Fred, would you add how to reach voters with disabilities that are youth? I know I've heard about the Disability Organizing Network, the DO Network. They always do a social media campaign. Any other recommendations for reaching college students and youth with disabilities?
I would bring in my website.
Websites, yeah.
on our website to do research or to get help. That we put information on our website and our social media, and bet you once they get the ballots, they will go on the county election office website, and they need to explain what the accessible voting options are. But some websites is hard to find.
So I'm hearing a TikTok video that explains accessible voting options. Is that where we're heading from this? So I know there's so much to talk about here. I had one more question for Mindy that's coming in through the Q&A. In the research, what other trusted messengers were identified?
So in the messaging itself, we kept it broad. So civil rights organizations is what we focused on. In a little while, in a few minutes, I'll talk about just trusted sources where people get their information, and kind of flesh that out a little bit. Yeah.
Great. Yep. So a lot of the questions are around demographics, which again we led with the teaser, which is the second part of this research presentation. So thank you to our panelists for engaging in this focused conversation about messaging. If people had other questions, please drop them in the Q&A. We're going to turn off the panel cameras and we're going to have Mindy share the second portion of the research. So thank you, Mindy.
So I've already given you the setup. Again, this is the same survey, same sample size, methodology, and so forth. So jumping in, oops, 1 second. There we go. So jumping in. So we asked voters what concerns they might have, if any, when it comes to casting their ballot in the November 2020 presidential, obviously the upcoming election. So first off, 32% said that they did have some sort of concern. And I'll focus now on what those concerns were, and that'll be the next couple of slides. So of those that have concerns, just over 14% said that they were concerned that they would become infected with COVID-19 when casting their ballot. And we give them multiple options. They could choose any and all that applied. They didn't have to just select one or the most concerning issue. But 14% said they were concerned with being infected with COVID. And I give you the top three here. I'll show you a slide in a moment. Another 12% said they were concerned that their ballot would not be counted accurately. And 10% concerned that they would not receive their ballot. So just breaking that out here, on the far left, this is for the total population. You'll see that 14% that I just gave you for COVID-19, that blue bar on the far left. Some of the other items that I haven't talked about, so 8.8%, that's the second bar, said they were concerned about the possibility of long lines. Another 5% inaccessible voting location, 4% almost finding their voting location, 6% said I didn't trust the USPS. That was kind of, again, here we kind of break it out because we give them also options in terms of just being concerned that the ballot wasn't counted. And 9.7, ballot tampering, and actually the full question said ballot tampering or vote tampering. Now, if we break it out by race, ethnicity, 30%, so a much higher number of African-American eligible voters, again, our respondents to the survey indicated that they are concerned about contracting COVID-19 when voting. And again, this is a representative survey, so representative of the state. 13.4% of Asian Americans said that they were concerned. 15% of Latinos were concerned, again, about specifically, I'm just focusing on COVID, and 11.7% of white non-Latinos. Let me show you that chart. There's a lot going on here, so I just highlighted specifically COVID. So the blue bar, if you see down at the bottom, I know we have the controls that are kind of in the way. The blue bar is COVID-19 infection. So given what we've heard and what we know about contraction rates and death rates, right, within the community of our communities of color, and particularly African American community, this may not be a surprise that we see a much higher percent here when it comes to being concerned about contracting COVID-19. But we also have other concerns here. So again, finding the voting location, long lines, uncomfortable in non-native voting language and so forth. So I just want to kind of highlight that. And we are going to make all of these slides available. So if you want to go back and take a look, I think I saw a question like on this topic in the Q&A. You'll have the detailed data. You can be able to kind of take your time with these slides and see much more than I'm highlighting here, of course. Okay, when do in-person voters plan on voting? So we got that question also in the Q&A. So just a quick breakout, about 32% plan at this point to vote on election day, another 10% day before election day, 18% weekend before, and 20%, because we gave this option, the week before election day if it was available. Now let's look at the actual bar chart, right? There's a couple additional, we've just got a kind of don't know and other there, but just breaking that out. Now let's look by specifically, there we go, by race, ethnicity. So here, let me just make sure I'm looking at the right one. Yeah. If we look at election day, which is yellow right here, remember I showed you here election day was 32% for everybody. For African Americans here, election day is yellow. I had a smaller percentage wanting to vote on election day, more wanting to vote if they voted in person, voting earlier. Asian Americans also lower. Latinos, very similar, a little bit lower than the total population. And whites, a larger percentage of whites when we break it out by race and ethnicity wanting to vote on election day. For voters of color, right, more swinging towards voting early. And by the way, if we look at this by race, I'm not showing you a slide on race ethnicity, but we did break it out by race ethnicity, again, having a representative sample there. And also, their younger voters were much more, in larger percentages, much more wanting to vote or planning to vote if it's available before election day. There was a divide here kind of at the 35 age mark. So 18 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 34-year-olds, fewer wanted to vote on election day. I hope I said that right a moment ago. Fewer wanted to vote on election day and more wanted to vote early. And then at the 35 to 44 and kind of up age groups, more wanted to vote on election day, fewer voting early. So I think that's an important distinction for those, especially those of you that are doing outreach to young people. Also, by the way, thinking about COVID, there were certainly some distinctions by age as well that I can talk about in the Q&A if you're interested. Now let's talk about the preferred way to cast a ballot. In the survey, we also broke this out by kind of the method that gives them the most confidence. You'll see all of that in the final report. Right now, I'm just going to talk about their preferred way to actually cast a ballot. So almost 42% said they prefer to mail. Their preferred way for this November was to mail in their ballot. Another almost 31% said voting in person, and we combine here voting in person, whether it's on election day or 3 days before election day. And 9.4% prefer dropping off their ballot at a voting location. And greater percentages of African Americans prefer to vote in person, and lower percentages of African Americans and Latinos prefer to vote prefer to mail in their ballot. So let me just visualize this for you. So here's that chart. This is again for everybody, regardless of race or ethnicity. So thinking ahead to the November 2020 presidential election, what's your most preferred way? That's the actual question that we asked. You can see that 41%, right, for mailing in the ballot. I combined a moment ago two categories to get to 30.8, but here on the left-hand side, those first two bars, just breaking it out, specifically 23% wanted to vote in person on election day, another 7% 3 days before. Okay. Now, if we break it out by race ethnicity, as I kind of previewed, African Americans, a larger percentage, just wanting to vote actually, so again, compared to everybody, about 10 percentage points more wanting to vote in person, specifically on election day, and smaller percentage for both African Americans and Latinos wanting to vote through the mail, sending their ballot specifically through the mail. And again, we'll make these slides available because I know many of you will want to study the details here. Okay, and also I'll address questions on age in the Q&A. We have a lot to get through. So there we go, moving on. Do you happen to know, next question, where to find information on the locations of where to vote in person in your community? So specific to voting in person, those locations. So first, 56% said yes, 17%, almost 18% said no. Let's break this out by, and we purposely, by the way, phrase it, do you happen to know, a little more casually to try to avoid social desirability effects. So in case you're wondering why it's worded that way. So African Americans, a larger percentage instead of 56, right? In that, looking at that blue bar, said yes, they happen to know where to find their locations. But a smaller percentage of Asian Americans, a slightly smaller percentage of Latinos said, compared to everybody, said that they know where to find those locations, and whites greater than the total average. Okay, let's move on here. Where do you typically turn for help with questions about registration or voting procedures? So this is a little broader. This isn't specific to just finding your in-person voting location. Just where do you turn for help, right? For registration, voting, for important election dates. And this is everybody here. So the County Voter Registration Information Guide, 33%. And again, this can be multiple, multiple options, multiple sources. We didn't make them pick one particular one. The county website, those are both right county generated tools. Vote by mail packet also received a high percentage. Call into my elections office, ads from community groups, 4.9, 10% for social media. Contacting specifically the voter contacting a community group was 3.3. Friends and family, 16.6. I'm just going to give you some larger numbers here. Now, if we look by, so really here, when we look at the total population, it's really skewed towards those kind of official governmental, right, county voter information resources, if you will. Breaking out by race, ethnicity, and there's a lot going on here, so forgive that. I'll just walk you through a little bit. We'll see some differences that'll pop out. So for the county information guide, if we just look at African Americans, that collection there on the far left, a higher percent, right, saying that they use the county information guide. If we look at the pink bar, right, which is friends and family, just want to take you back to everybody. Friends and family for everybody was 16.6%. If you see it there. Now let's go back to race, ethnicity. Looking at that pink bar, a little lower for African Americans, very similar for Asian Americans, higher for Latinos at almost 20%. So just calling that out there. And then contacting a community group, you may remember that was, or contacting specifically, the voter contacting a community group was 3%. And here, if I can find it again, the gray is contact a community group. So about even with everybody for African Americans, a little bit lower for Asian Americans, about the same for Latinos, and a little bit lower for whites. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there. I think what I'll just say a couple of things regarding specifically age. So I mentioned younger people, the differences in terms of being concerned around COVID, younger people wanting to, at higher percentages, wanting to vote early, thinking about specifically the answers around their preferred vote method. Also there we saw a divide between kind of older, younger. So this time the divide was at the 45 plus. So kind of everybody below, or at least the age groups below 45, had a different perspective when it came to voting in person versus voting by mail. It's not a surprise. So fewer younger people said that they wanted, or that they preferred to vote by mail. More older people at 45 plus said that they wanted to vote by mail. That's really consistent with previous research that we've done and others in California that has identified that vote by mail use is, particularly for 18 to 24-year-olds, much lower than older age groups. So again, in this election, we're still seeing those trends in the time of COVID. So I just wanted to point that out. And I think I will leave it there to see what questions I get. So Astrid, how do you want to handle the Q&A specifically?
Thanks, Mindy. We're going to do another panel discussion to hear from our election expert, advocacy expert, and community expert. And we will also invite, yeah, there we go. So welcome to stay on this panel if you want. We're going to ask folks to please submit their questions on the Q&A. And if I can ask Fred and Courtney and Karen to join us back on. Great. So thank you, Mindy, for that presentation. I think people are always excited to get right into the details of how things break down. And as you said, there was a lot there. I think everybody was like leaning into their screen trying to see those details. So the link for the fact sheet has been dropped into the chat. So you can click on there to get a bigger view of those details. And I want to go ahead and just jump in. We have questions on the Q&A. I wanted to also just get the panel started thinking about the research shows that people plan to vote this November, most of them on election day. And as we saw, some variation for youth, which is exciting to hear. And from the work we saw around Voters' Choice Act counties, even when there are early voting opportunities, people largely still show up on election day. So how do we address that? You know, there's a lot of efforts wanting to encourage people to vote early, but human nature is as it is. I guess even in a pandemic, we're seeing that people still want to vote on that election day. So how are you all thinking about messaging on the voting options and encouraging that early voting? Is there a way to change voters' perspectives on when to vote?
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah, that's been one of our biggest struggles. And, you know, I think situations like presidential primary elections always burn voters, especially as they witness candidates that drop out. It kind of scares them into voting earlier, or to avoid voting earlier, I should say. So, you know, I mean, we try to let it, again, with expectations, let folks know there will be lines, but that doesn't seem to deter folks. And some, like even when we, at one of our vote centers at our Sac State University, you know, there were hour-long lines all day, and yet the students there had the best attitude about it, and it was very much like a community event. You know, it does take on a little bit more of a serious side now with a pandemic, and I know we're going to continue to let folks know there will be lines, absolutely, and it will be a long night. You know, we've also thrown around the idea of how to advertise the fact that, you know, the earlier your ballot comes back, the earlier we can count it. And, you know, all ballots returned, again, the timelines vary on counties, but, you know, you return your ballot early on, and it will be in that 8 p.m. election night results release. Do voters care enough about that? I don't know. And then, you know, something I think that points back to Mindy's study was the fact that from what I understood, and Mindy, let me know if I'm wrong, it sounded like, you know, large percentage of African-American voters wanted to vote in person, but also there was a large percentage that had the safety concern. So maybe we take that into account and emphasize that the early voting days might be safer. I don't know. I mean, the fact of the matter is it probably will be, because it will be less people to manage for our poll workers. You know, and election day is always a little bit chaotic, but would love to hear from other folks, because it's something we definitely struggle with.
And actually, I'll just jump in on that, if I may, Courtney, since you referenced me. There's another study that I recently presented as a partnered webinar with the Future of California Elections back in May, and this was a study through a group called the New Electorate, which consists of a number of UC researchers and myself. And for those of you that saw this, it might ring a bell, but we did specifically ask about voters' comfort in waiting in line in person at a polling place or vote center. And when they knew, when they were asked a question, and then they were told again that there would be PPE put in place, social distancing put in place, their comfort level went up quite significantly across the board, across race, ethnicity, every group we looked at, in many cases close to 20 percentage points higher. And what we learned from that was, it wasn't just putting the safety measures in place, it was telling people that you put the safety measures in place, kind of reassuring them, and that should be a key component of of the outreach and voter education process. So I just wanted to mention that work that we found as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. And yeah, everybody please jump in conversation. I'm moderator only to keep us organized, but jump in with questions for Mindy since she's on here. Fred, I wanted to ask you about this as well. You know, you mentioned in your opening comments how voter disabilities need options, including that opportunity to vote in person. How is DRC thinking about messaging and encourage early voting for that?
Basically, Courtney said that early voting is available to prevent, hopefully, long lines on election day. The people have less chance of getting ill, and if they vote early, they'll have a lower chance of being in contact with the virus. I don't know how that will work, but that's what we're doing, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And I will say, I know it's unfair to ask you all, you know, how is it? What's the solution? We don't have them. So I wanted to preface that again. You know, these are our best thinkers around these spaces, and so that's why I wanted to convene this panel. I will also say that even though we're talking about voting in person early, folks should make sure to check in with their local election official to make sure what days that's going to be offered and where, because it will vary from county to county. So I just wanted to add that point. Karen, how is Turla thinking about talking about early voting or what people can expect on election day? Are you being as honest as you should in your conversations? Sorry, Courtney, keep on bringing that one up.
No, yeah. I mean, we started these conversations right after the primary. I mean, we called 243 voters and we asked them, hey, how are you thinking about like voting for this election? Would you consider voting by mail? But we had an overwhelming response of over 54% of our voters saying that they would still prefer voting in person. And this is a month after like the stay-at-home orders came about. So we are being honest with ourselves, and we know that most of our voters are going to show up to the polls and to vote centers on November 3rd, and we still plan to incorporate like the voting options and early voting as part of our messaging and talk to them like as part of our script, whether we're calling them text messaging. But we know that voters have like a behavior of, you know, just showing up to the polls on election day, and we're not going to be able to change that in the period of 10 weeks. Like, we got to be realistic. We have about 10, 12 weeks until election, and every voter has complex needs, and we need to be able to talk about like the fact that monolingual Spanish speaker voters who are going to receive a vote by mail ballot in English, they might look at it and they'd be like, this looks like a receipt, I'm just gonna throw it away, this might just be advertisement. But a young voter who's a first-time voter might actually look carefully through the mail and be able to understand, and might be able to learn from a mailer that they have to sign the back of their ballot, that they have to make sure that they put the date. But we know an older voter who's a first-time voter who just became naturalized the citizen might feel more comfortable and might even be so excited that this is their first election that they might want to go and show up in person to the polls because they want to celebrate this historic moment in their lives that they became a U.S. citizen. And they might want to ask someone who looks like me, who looks like their daughters, again, to show them how to vote step by step and make sure that they even though they know how to fill out the ballot, they still want that extra reassurance that they're telling them, yes, you did it correctly. So yes, we're going to be honest with them about, you know, you have these early options. You can vote by mail, and there's going to be safety measures in place. But but we have to be able to talk about all the options available to them, not just voting by mail.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go over. Oh, go ahead, Mindy.
Jump in too. I neglected to mention that in the full report, and this is very important. We conducted the survey both in English and Spanish, and in the full report, we will have a breakout specifically for Spanish voters. And we had a large sample for Spanish voters.
Great, thank you, Mindy. And that was one of the questions in the Q&A, so thanks for jumping in with that.
And I didn't even see that. But
yeah. So going back to the data, so I wanted to, sorry, there was 2 data questions that came in. Somebody was asking if in the numbers that you showed that showed 30% are likely to vote in person, how do you take that number when your county, your individual county may have a high VBM already? So just trying to understand what the data showed and then people's own understanding of vote by mail rates in their own county, and how does somebody to balance those two?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. So the results that I'm showing today are at the state level, statewide level. So of course, in any of these questions, there would be at least some degree of variation, right, by county. And certainly we know, counties across the state have already, the voters or potential voters within them have different use around vote by mail, different familiarity around vote by mail. So what I'm presenting is just important is statewide. In our full report, we will break out the data at the very least for LA County, because we did have a large enough sample to do that. That was by design. We may also present it for Orange County and perhaps the Bay Area as a region. At least that was part of our initial intent. We will not be able to break it out by individual county just because the sample sizes will be too small. So, and that's, obviously a typical limitation in a statewide survey. We're fortunate to be able to break it out in the ways that we can because of the large, unusually large size.
Great, thank you. So we talked a bit about in-person voting and how to talk to voters, perhaps about encouraging them to vote earlier or provide them honest talking points about voting on election day and what to expect. We had a couple of questions come in around vote by mail. And Courtney, a couple questions for you on this. Are there going to be drop boxes in the community college in Sacramento? So a very specific Sacramento question, but I thought it's always good to get information out for your constituents.
Yeah, we're still working on confirming all of our locations. We are a little behind. We normally have most of our locations secured, but of course, there's some issues and security, safety concerns. There's also a lot of locations that we've used in the past for either drop boxes or vote centers. They're hosting food distribution sites, they're hosting COVID testing, they're hosting daycare, a lot of other services, important services that they're providing to the community, which unfortunately means for elections, they're not able to host. So we are struggling quite a bit, but if you have some contact information, let me know, but I believe we have reached out to our community colleges. I know at least one will be a vote center in November. We finally got the confirmation last week, so we are still definitely working on those. So any ideas, please let us know. Also, our goal is to find locations that even if for whatever reason we have to completely shut down or things change, we want to find locations that will continue to be open, grocery stores, pharmacies, that sort of thing. So we do want to kind of keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. And so I wanted to raise that point because there's a lot of details to election administration when we talk about the voting options and setting those forward. So as Courtney just shared, election officials across the state are still developing their locations. Schools are not as available as they have been in the past. And also the drop-off boxes, those that are not permanent, are sometimes housed in libraries who now have like different hours and public spaces that people are accessing in different ways. So I wanted to have the panel talk a little bit about information. We saw in Mindy's research where voters go to get information. That was one of the survey questions. And election websites, election official websites, and the voter information guide are important sources. And so I had this as a closer question, but I really think it's important to spend some time on this and hear from the panel their thoughts. How do we continue to improve information in official sources for voters with disabilities, for limited English proficient voters, and for voters in general? What are things that, that Karen, you would want election officials to know about making sure to have readable, accessible information on their website?
Yeah, I think one good place to start is to know that the information is just not one size fits all. Like Courtney was saying at the beginning, it's like a lot of places are talking about like vote safe. But when we asked our community what vote safe means to them, they had the idea that it meant that there wasn't going to be any hacking in the elections. So like literal translations don't always necessarily translate. And I think that's one of the challenges that we gotta be really careful with the translations that we're using. And that's why we gotta create that space for community organization engagement. So invite other organizations, community-based organizations to be part of the conversation. I know we're in such a short timeline, but when community-based organizations are brought to the table, even to like 1 hour conversations, even spaces that already exist, and create that space for us to give input, we can better serve our communities because we know what they understand and we know what they need. And I think that's the best place to start, just like building that community, or like inviting high schoolers, helping us. Like if you need help finding like the high school group, the college group students who don't know about voting, and them giving you the opinion on what's best for voting, we can create a space for you to have those conversations with those group of people. And we're just here available to do everything that we can to make sure that our communities are educated.
Thanks, Karen. And Fred, what would you want election officials to know about reaching voters this election cycle? What, you talked about accessible websites as one of the things that DRC has worked on in the past. What are things that you would prioritize for election officials?
Not only accessible websites that have information about accessible voting options.
Yeah, we'll take the siren as the emphasis to that statement, which is websites that have accessible voting options. So remote accessible vote by mail, it's a very technical term, but it will be available to all voters for this election. So thank you for highlighting that. We have about 10 minutes left in our conversation. Time's just flying by. And so I wanted to, let me check real quick. The question here is, Vote Safe is already being promoted by the Secretary of State. If counties don't adopt that message, don't we risk confusing voters with a different message?
Yeah, I think, this is Courtney, I think, the fact that we all kind of have different methods and different ways of even whether or not we say vote center or polling place or voter service center, or whether we say vote by mail or call it something else. I think that's a struggle we all have. And, we kind of, with vote by mail, we have some of our neighbors that want to call it something different, but with all of our stuff that we've already published and translated and used for years, we want to be consistent. So I think, the goal is to be as consistent with your county messaging as you've done, and with terms that you've already used and adopted in your county, and then introduce some of those things, slowly. And as Karen said, get the community feedback on that. Say, hey, the state's working on this vote safe effort. Could it mean other things? Or is there another way we should translate it? And, you really kind of need that community input and feedback. But I think, if election officials start changing a lot of their verbiage or terms right now, it's going to add more confusion. So I don't know what that balance is of keeping your consistent messaging, but also incorporating that new messaging.
Thank you, Courtney. And Mindy, you tested some of that balance in your messaging. What did you see? How much of the safe voting made a difference for people's impact in how they felt about voting for November?
Yeah, well, overall, so of course, at the individual level, right, there are differences, but overall, kind of the net gain, if you will, the voting options message had a more positive impact than when adding in a safety message, except for, as I mentioned, when that safety message was delivered by a trusted messenger. So the combination, so I think who delivers that matters. Now, of course, we weren't able to in the study to name specific messengers and really, test kind of within that. It would be logical that, and as a researcher, I tread carefully here, but it would be logical that if the message is coming from somebody, a community group or entity that's local, that somebody already has a connection with, that trust and relationship is even greater, that maybe there might even be a greater impact than what we saw in what we tested. But it did matter who delivered it. And again, just treading carefully in terms of what we know and what we don't know from the experimental design. It's just simply, for some people, that reminder of the safety can be reassuring, but for some folks, it might not be. And I know that's what a lot of election officials and, of course, in community groups have been struggling with in terms of how to handle approaching a safety message. And it seems at least having a trusted messenger do that helps kind of, helps in that delivery and the positive kind of impact of it. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy, for providing that deeper insight into that point.
I was going to say too, while I have the floor for just a moment, because I know we are winding down. We were talking about information. We were talking about young people a moment ago, and I don't think I mentioned this before, but just the question that I showed in my presentation around information. So, do voters happen to know, where their locations are? Young people were also much less likely, smaller percentages to say that they knew where their locations were and where to get information. So you're starting with, if you're outreaching, and this is probably no surprise to those that work with young people, but you're starting with a population that from the get-go already, fewer of them know how to get that information. And the other item I wanted to highlight too, which might be a little surprising to some, but it's actually consistent with another recent survey that I did. More young people cited, and again, this is specific to voting in November, but more young people cited COVID as a concern around voting than older voters did. So there was this divide around age 35, so 18 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 34-year-olds had greater percentages of citing that specifically when it came to voting. So just, I'm emphasizing that too in the moment, just because as we make assumptions about what matters to voters by age, that COVID does matter to young people. So I'm going to highlight that since I had a moment.
Absolutely. And so we have 3 minutes left. I want to hear from our panel in 30 seconds from each of our panelists. What's the last message, reflecting on the research, recognizing that strategies for education and outreach are adapting, what are the top 2 messages that you're thinking about that to elevate for your constituents? And we'll go Fred, Karen, and Courtney. So reflecting on the research, what are the top 2 messages you want voters to know?
The first one is the beginning. You these options, both Romero is probably the preferred in this time, but you also have Romero accessible for Romero and in person from Romero and what that look like is in each county. Some counties haven't decided yet.
Absolutely. So across the state, we will have vote by mail, but it will be different from county to county in terms of the in-person options. And also you can access the remote accessible vote by mail. I also want to highlight the fact sheet, the FAQ that FOS released today that explains some of the more technical and nuanced things there. And I wanted to go ahead and pass the mic to Karen as we wrap up as well. And Courtney, I do want to still hear from you. What are messages that reflecting on the research that you're thinking about lifting up, Karen, and then Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still going to continue to reflect on the message of like empowerment. I think that was something that was really important. And I shared with Mindy before we started the research, we highlight empowerment, that you're voting for your community, you're voting for your family, you're voting for your neighborhood. And for us, that we're an immigrant rights organization, for many of us, they're voting for a lot of community members who are not able to vote and use their voice. So that's going to be one of the message that we're going to continue to carry across, and that Mindy's research continues to support, and obviously the voting options. So while leveraging like the empowerment of our communities, leveraging all the voting options that they have available to them.
And then to add on, I agree with Karen, that empowerment part was pretty powerful, actually. We're going to continue to talk about vote by mail and the fact that, California knows how to do it right. And there's a lot of myths and misinformation out there, and to contact us for concerns on that. With the layered security approach to making sure every ballot counts. And also be prepared. The fact, it still sounds like a lot of folks are going to wait until election day, and that's fine. So what can we do? Well, let's encourage voters to bring their county voter information guide to help with check-in, especially since that will be difficult with folks wearing masks. Bring that county voter information guide, and if there's a sample ballot in there, fill it out ahead of time. There's a lot of propositions on that ballot. We have a lot of local measures as well. Hopefully Kim Alexander will do another proposition song, but do that work ahead of time so your time in the voting area is limited to protect your health and safety.
Great, thank you to our panel for those last reflections on this important topic. We are at time. Mindy, I just want to thank you so much for this timely body of work. There's so much in the data, and I think everybody's anxious to see the report. The link for the fact sheet was dropped in today's chat, and please stay connected and we'll announce the final report. Mindy, any final reflections that you wanted to share?
Just thank you again, Astrid. You and your team, as always, wonderful to work with. Thank you personally for your inspiration around the study and the partnership around the study. And of course, to the advisory committee members, and Fred and Karen are both a part of that, playing double duty today. So there is a lot more to come. The report actually will be quite large. And there'll be a very large, I want to highlight to folks, if you're interested in this work, when the report comes, it'll have a very large appendix. And basically, because of that large size, again, we're able to report the data by subgroup much more deeply than we normally can. And so look at that appendix, because we'll have everything kind of broken out there. If we don't talk about it in the report, it'll be available. And I think there'll be something for everybody in terms of, we hope that's useful and helpful. So. Great.
Well, thank you again to our panel, to Mindy. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you've gained as much from this research as we have. I wanted to just also do a couple of thank yous to the FOS staff, to Lupe and to Katie, to Harley Ham with Sol Price School of Public Policy. Thank you for your partnership. And
yes,
also,
thank you, Harley, very much.
Harley was managing the chat this whole time, and yes. Lupe and Katie were behind the scenes managing the videos. So thank you guys. This event couldn't happen without all of you. And I just want to also thank you to our partners just throughout the year, to our funders, James Irvine Foundation, to Democracy Fund, the research is supported by Democracy Fund, and to all of you who participate with Future of California elections year-round through our work groups. And we will be posting our work on our website. Please sign up for our newsletter, sign up with the Center for Inclusive Democracy to get the first alert when that report drops. And that's it. Be safe, everyone. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and let's get out there and get this information out to folks.